Greetings, gang! Everyone did a nice job working through the APA video tutorials and practicing the headers and sections, but there were a couple of items I'd like to explain a little further. For the shortened titles in the header, let's take a look at the Purdue OWL link and look at some whys and hows. And as you can see, I've added the Purdue OWL APA formatting style guide to our Moodle page for easy access. And this link will take us to the APA style general format. So you guys can have this, and then all of the links that you need for APA style will be on the left-hand side. But for what I want to show you, we just need the general format. So as we scroll down, we can see that the running head is defined right here as the shortened version of your paper's title and cannot exceed 50 characters, including spacing and punctuation. I noticed many of you had shortened titles that were either longer than this or were simply the first few words of your longer title and didn't necessarily make a complete phrase. Make sure your shortened titles capture main concepts and leave out smaller, unnecessary words. The purpose of the running head is really all about publication and easy finding when searching in a database. Because you narrow to a more complete phrase of your longer title, when someone searches for key phrases in a database, running heads are then easier to pull pieces up in a hit. Also, in larger works like a textbook or a chapter book, running heads are published at the tops of pages, so when readers want a quick reference for what section they're in without flipping back to the front of the table of contents, they have a quick reminder. The nature of shortened titles is similar in part to abstracts in that the purpose of the abstract is really geared toward publication and readership. As I graded part 2 of the APA assignment, many of you wrote correctly about the purpose of the abstract, and you can see further down on the same page what abstracts are meant to do. So as we scroll down, we can see about the abstract. And the abstracts are very concise. They're between 150 words and 250 words only. They're concise summaries on the topic, research, data, and the future work in the essay, similar to an introduction, but much more specific to the entire entity. So they do require more information than an introduction. A lot of you guys are really accurate about that in your work for the APA format. Abstracts are meant to help researchers, not unlike yourselves, as they sift through material. So there's so much published material on any given subject. Abstracts help researchers and readers save time. For example, if you're reading on a subject to support or negate your ideas, an abstract can help you know if you should look at a piece any further or not. A title on a database might seem like it relates to the research you need, so you read the abstract only to find that the topic and the research they used doesn't match what you were looking for at all. The abstract saved you from having to skim through a 20-page document. Abstracts are published more in longer texts and within journals or scholarly publications. They don't typically appear on general websites or popular news stories. You will notice them as you search through material on the OU database. Perhaps compare some of the abstracts you're seeing to what standard introductions require in an academic essay to see the difference in how they should be written. And so the idea here too is that for your shortened title and your longer title and your abstract, feel free to write these closer towards the end of your writing process. We won't have the abstracts due until, you can have them due for the second draft, you won't need them due for the first draft. Because you won't really be able to write a concise summary about your paper until you're almost finished, so that's completely fine. So I just wanted to show you those two concepts here. And the next thing I want to pull your guys' attention to is peer-reviewed sources. So I'm on the OU database, and what many of you guys did a great job in our discussion board in week 3, analyzing the 3 sources: Autism Daddy, Pew Research, and the Teaching Health Law. Some of you have mentioned that experts in the writing field on their subject creates bias, but I wanted to explain that there's a big difference between informed studies, informed opinions, expertise, and working with other experts in the same field versus one or more individuals with a strong, uninformed opinion on something. There's a big difference between that. It is good, though, that many of you pointed out that all sources, no matter where they come from, should be analyzed for credibility. So even if you're talking about bias, I do think it's good to be looking at a scholarly source and be looking for, okay, well, are they being biased? Do they have resources? That's a really good thing. Here are some more ways to analyze a source to determine if it's peer-reviewed, because it's not so easy. Even if we have the scholarly and peer-reviewed button marked, it doesn't guarantee that our source is peer-reviewed. So I do want to take you through a couple of more concrete steps to guarantee that that you have 2 peer-reviewed sources for your paper. Here in the OU library database, I've entered a keyword search on stem cell research. I know that a couple of you might have this topic, so here we go. And I do have the scholarly and peer-reviewed button selected, and to narrow the search. So I just kind of want us to go through a couple of things just to make sure that our source is credible. The first source that pops up, we could just check the dates. This one is pretty recent. It's from 2017. But just to be sure, let's check the next couple to see if we have anything that's more recent. The next one is from 2010, so that's not good. 2012, I have one from 2017, so neither of those. A little further, 2014. Alright, so let's go back up to this first one. 2017 is great. We've got multiple authors, so right away we've got a good year. We've got multiple sources, so let's just go ahead and check and open that. So that's pretty good for us. Oh, I gotta log in. Sorry, guys. Alright, so we're doing pretty good so far. We have those authors listed. Now, while we can't see their credentials listed, I do think that there's some stuff that will be able to point towards whether or not they're experts in the field. So even though their credentials aren't there, we might be able to determine, even with the abstract, because the abstract is supposed to discuss the research that they're doing in the article, that may pinpoint whether or not they're experts based on the kind of research they're going to do. So if we even just take a look at what they're doing in the abstract, we should be able to determine some of that. So if we're looking at, even just jumping down and skimming in this abstract, a total of 1,217 articles were retrieved, 21 which were used in a study. Exercises known as effective intervention in alleviating physical and mental problems of patients. These studies demonstrated the positive effects. Just looking through some of the material that they're going to do for Medline, Scientific Information Database. The information that they have access to, I would say, is a pretty good indication in how they're going to analyze this material. There's a multitude of studies on some of the contemporary and alternative therapy methods. I would say they have a pretty good knowledge of the material in this article, and they have a pretty good command of the material. So I would say right away that it's relatively safe to assume they're experts here. So I would like to see what kind of publication they're writing for, because as we know, peer-reviewed sources are experts in the field writing for experts in the field. So we need to see what kind of publication they're writing for, and there's multiple authors here. So we're good with that. And their publication is the Journal of Research in Medical Science. So that makes a lot of sense too. Excellent. This is a scholarly journal. So we know that. They have a good command of sources. That's good. So we've got 2 check marks. The final thing we kind of want to look at is to see what kind of sources they're using. Now I know we just looked at the abstract, and that's telling us what kind of source material they're hoping to use, what they're going to use. But we can just go ahead and skim down. Maybe I have to look through the article exactly. I mean, but, well, as we're going through, we can look to see what they've done. If you guys, I mean, I'm not familiar with the medical field or the science field all that well, but if you take a look, this all looks pretty scientific. It was published in the journal. It looks pretty scientific. So if we look, just skimming, and if we look down at their references, they do have lots of references with lots of names. Oh, pretty impressive. And we can take a peek at the journals. But they have 44 sources. So yeah, so I would say that this is a pretty good hit for a peer-reviewed source. And if you want to be super absolutely positive, clear that this is a peer-reviewed source, I have one final thing that would tell you for certain. On our Moodle page at the very bottom of our top portion, there is a link that you can go to. It is a peer-reviewed source checker. So if you have a link, if you have an article like the one we just looked at, and you just want to be absolutely certainly clear, I'm pretty certain this is a peer-reviewed source. So you could use that in your paper. But you could go to this link, and this is called Ehrlich's Web. You use your institutional login credentials, and what that means is just use your OU login and password. I actually can't log in. I'm not a student, so my credentials will not work here, so I can't show you this website. But you would log in, and it will take you to a website and ask you for information on the source that you're looking at. So you would enter the information, and then you click enter, whatever button it is. And if your source is peer-reviewed, an icon that looks like a referee shirt will appear in the left-hand column, and then you'll know for sure your source is peer-reviewed. The only downfall with the web server is that only so many users can be logged in at a time. So if you can't get in, simply try back later. So that source is there for you. The final lesson that I want to show you guys in this video is we're gonna go back to Purdue OWL here, and I want to talk to you about paraphrasing your sources. So this lesson defines quoting, paraphrasing, and summarizing, and the different ways that we use our sources, the different ways that we incorporate our sources into our paper. And of course we can quote, and quoting is the exact use of the original writer's or speaker's words, and we show the use of their work by using quotation marks. We absolutely must cite that information, of course. Paraphrasing is using our own words to explain the ideas someone else said or wrote about in the same length or shorter than the original. If we borrow a specific word or phrase, we can put those in quotes, but the rest of their work is written in our own words. Okay, so we're paraphrasing. And we still cite that information. And then a summary, it's very similar to paraphrasing, but it's a much shorter version of someone else's ideas, again, written in our own words. So we're taking a larger concept and we're shortening it. So it's summarizing. And we still cite that information too. Any borrowed quotes or ideas are always cited. You must cite borrowed ideas or information from somewhere else. That's the concept. So the idea, though, is that as you advance in your academic careers, the amount of quoted material you use should decrease, and the amount of paraphrasing and summarizing should increase. The reasons why is because quoting and other writers immediately changes the tone of writing. Quoting somebody else, they have a different way of speaking and writing than you do. Their word choices are different than yours. their tone and target audience is different than what you're writing for. So if you're using lots of sources, that's a lot of different voices speaking. And if we remember from annoying ways that people use sources, if you're quoting, you have to let your readers know who's speaking. So there will be a lot of stopping and starting of ideas just to introduce the next person so your readers won't be lost with blind quotes. So the essay becomes very choppy with too many quotes. And finally, if there's too many quotes in a paper, it's more likely that the writer isn't fully analyzing what's written. Copy and paste is an easy tool to use, but it allows us to skim far too much as writers. So paraphrasing and summarizing keeps the work in your voice and allows you to understand and synthesize your sources and make your writing flow. So there are only two reasons to quote. One, if the original text is too complex for you to reword yourself and you'll take the material out of context. So even this you can actually work around by quoting only the more complex words or phrases and then paraphrasing the rest. So that's rule number one. And two is the quote is so poetic and beautiful that your paraphrase will undo its beauty. And this is actually pretty unlikely in a scientific-based essay, but nevertheless, it is a rule, and you should keep it in mind. So outside of those rules, all other use of sources should be paraphrased and summarized. And the rest of this page here, so those are the definitions of the three. And why use quotes, paraphrases, and summaries? And of course, we use those to back up our work. How to use paraphrases and quotes and summaries. So that's just that page there. But if you're unsure of how to paraphrase, or you feel like your paraphrasing skills are not strong as you'd like them to be, I want you to take a look at the second link here. And I'll provide this link on, this whole link on quoting, paraphrasing, and summarizing underneath this tutorial video on our Moodle page. But looking at this next page here, you can see some of the samples of paraphrasing, and even this next link, paraphrase exercises, gives some exercises so you can actually practice if you don't feel like you paraphrase well. So you can actually see a paraphrase, another definition here for you. And then the value of paraphrasing, steps of effective paraphrasing, and then some examples. They have an original passage here, an actual legitimate paraphrase, so you can see a sample, an acceptable summary, so you can see, actually I do see here that the summary is much shorter than the original. A paraphrase is a little bit longer, but it's also shorter. And then, well, shorter than, sorry, the original text. That seemed funny for a second. A paraphrase is longer than a summary, but shorter than the original text. That's what that means. And then here's a plagiarized version because it's not cited and it does take actual verbiage from the original. So you guys can see some samples there. But finally, a thought on this that I want to share to give you some reassurance. Some of my students in the past have mentioned that, yes, quoting is easier. It also clearly shows that they aren't trying to plagiarize, even if they accidentally forget to do an in-text citation. A quote immediately shows that a student isn't stealing. They know someone else said it. But paraphrasing and then forgetting to cite the source doesn't look that way. And that meant a lot to me as a professor. That means a lot. We try to get you guys to write better and to paraphrase, and then sometimes students get clobbered for cheating. So keep this in mind. If you've cited most of your sources throughout your essay, but you miss a couple of them, I'm going to know that you just made a mistake and you're not purposefully plagiarizing. If you've introduced your sources too, working to incorporate them, but you miss a citation somewhere along the way, I will also recognize that as a mistake. So basically, if you're working in some areas to introduce your source material, but somewhere you miss something, I am not going to think that you're purposely trying to plagiarize. So this is why in the first year writing courses, we submit drafts before the finals. If you never turn those drafts in, I can't help you catch those mistakes. Those are errors, not plagiarism. You may have heard or felt differently in the past, but this is the way I teach my courses. We're all learning, and this is the best way to do it. Make mistakes, and I'll show you how to fix them, because citing is hard. We all know that copying and pasting whole essays or parts of work to pad our paper is wrong, especially if you're not citing it. But it's pretty clear to me, especially if you're working in certain sections of your essay to cite stuff and then other places there's a mistake. So please don't let that stop you or scare you from being a good writer. So if you're ever unsure, I'm always here. And good luck, and keep writing.